Here's a basic overview of photosynthesis. Trust me, it gets much more complicated, but we're going to keep it simple, just enough to get you through the EOC. So first of all, let's start very basic. Where does photosynthesis take place? Every green leaf and stem in a plant and some bacteria have the little green organelles within their cells. So here's a plant cell. The big blue thing here is the vacuole that stores water and chemicals and other things. The red part here is probably the nucleus. You've got the Golgi apparatus here, maybe some endoplasmic reticulum over here, but all of the green ones are chloroplasts. Now, the green color comes from the granum, okay, which are stacks of thylakoids, and the thylakoids are the little discs, and it's this granum that contains the pigment chlorophyll, which makes them green. There's a fluid inside the chloroplast, and that fluid is called the stroma. So let's take a closer look at that. Here's a picture that's a little bit clearer. You have an outer membrane and an inner membrane, and inside there you have thylakoids, which are these individual little discs. You can think of them as plates stacked up, or I really like the candy Smarties, and it looks like a little roll of green Smarties to me. So the thylakoids are the individual little Smarties, and the granum would be a whole stack of these thylakoids. And you notice they're green, so this is where the green color comes from. This is where the chlorophyll pigment is located. And then the fluid that surrounds all of these stacks of thylakoids is called the stroma, and it's aqueous, meaning it's a water-based solution. So, where in here does the light cycle happen? Well, if chlorophyll is the pigment that traps light, then it must take place in the green parts, which are the thylakoids. So, because the thylakoids have the green pigment, and the green pigment is what captures the light, this is where the light cycle happens, in these thylakoids. The Calvin cycle takes place still inside the chlorophyll, but it's within this solution surrounding the thylakoid, so it's in the stroma. Let's talk about the light reactions. We're going to talk about it in terms of what goes in and what comes out, the reactants and the products. The reactants are obviously light, so sunlight, and we're going to talk about light in terms of photons. So it's actually these little photons of light. Here's the stacks of thylakoids in our diagram. They're colored white here, but they should probably be green. And the light comes in, strikes the chlorophyll, the green pigment, and a reaction happens with water. So we have light energy in the form of photons, we have water, and then we have our empty energy molecules. NAD plus and ADP, and then a phosphate molecule are going to be transformed into ATP, NADPH. And these are energy molecules that we'll use later in photosynthesis. So in order to create these molecules, in order to fill them up with energy from the sun, those energy molecules come in and they're empty right now. They're not able to release the energy needed for the Calvin cycle. So they come back into the thylakoids, and the light comes in along with water. All three of these things, 4 or 5 technically, depending on these, but the empty energy molecules, the water and the light, all converge here in the thylakoid, in the granum, and through the process of photosystem 2, the electron transport chain, and photosystem 1, through all three of those processes, the energy molecules are complete, or the energy molecules are filled up, if you want to think of it that way. So in the end, combining the light energy, the water, and these empty energy molecules, we get full energy molecules, and we get oxygen as a waste product, which is great for us, right? So we have our energy molecules, which, if you're looking at it from the plant's point of view, this is the most important part right here. It doesn't need the oxygen, and it releases the oxygen from the chloroplast, and it's then carried to the outer edges of the plant where it's released into the atmosphere. And we really like it because we need it, so it's good they do that. The energy molecules, though, are, from the plant's perspective, the most important part. These energy molecules are needed in order to drive the Calvin cycle, which is the next step. Now, here's where a lot of you got confused during these chapters. Photosynthesis does produce some ATP. But as you'll notice when we go to the Calvin cycle, every bit of this ATP is used up to make sugar. There is no question about whether or not this ATP ever leaves the chloroplast, and the answer is that it does not. The chloroplast does not produce ATP that can be used by other parts of the cell. It doesn't happen. Every little bit of this ATP is used up in the Calvin cycle. This is why plant cells must have a mitochondria as well, because that mitochondria can then take the sugars that are made during photosynthesis and produce lots of usable ATP. So yes, in photosynthesis we do produce a small amount of ATP, but hear me carefully. It does not ever leave the chloroplast. It cannot ever be available to other organs, to other organelles and other plant processes that go on that may need ATP. It only goes to the Calvin cycle. So, having said that, let's follow the ATP and the NADPH that are now full with energy to the Calvin cycle. So here we are on the other half of the diagram. Here are full energy molecules, our ATP and our NADPH. And those are our reactants. Those are things that are going into this cycle. The other thing that we're putting into this cycle is our carbon dioxide. So our CO2 molecules from the atmosphere and the energy molecules that we made during the light cycle all go in to turn around several times in the Calvin cycle to produce sugar. Now it also produces those empty energy molecules that will go back to the thylakoids. So these two processes depend on each other for the recycling of these energy molecules. So the only real export, the only thing that leaves the chloroplast are sugars. And these sugars can be used to make carbohydrates and the other macromolecules that we studied. For purposes of the EOC, you are not going to need to know RUBP or G3P or the phosphoglycerate, but you will need to know the Calvin cycle and the basic reactants, carbon dioxide, and full energy molecules, ATP, and that it goes around, produces sugar, and those empty energy molecules. A couple other features of plant cells that we need to note are the stoma, and that's plural, or stomata is plural, stoma is singular. And these are little pores, and they look like a little mouth, like little lips almost, in the underside of plant leaves and on stems. Wherever you have green coloring in a plant, you're going to have some stoma. And these little pores open up and they let in the carbon dioxide and let out the oxygen. Pretty cool. Now, even though these are like little mouths and they open up, if we open up our mouth, we have to actually move our muscles. We actually have to move our diaphragm to pull in oxygen and to push carbon dioxide out. Well, plant cells don't have little muscles in there. So how does the oxygen and carbon dioxide and the water vapor move in and out of these pores? It's a very interesting question. And it has a lot to do with our last chapter, which I know you're excited about. Diffusion. So remember that diffusion is moving from a high concentration to a lower concentration. So once the cell uses up the carbon dioxide that's available to it, there is a low concentration of carbon dioxide in the cell. If it has used it to make sugars, it's all gone. When the stoma is open, that creates a low concentration of CO2 in the cell and a high concentration of CO2 outside of the cell. And the CO2 will actually move into the leaf of the plant where it can be used by the individual chloroplast organelles to run photosynthesis. This is the same way that oxygen leaves the plant. As the light cycle continues to fill up those energy molecules, it creates a large amount of O2, oxygen. And that oxygen will build up in the space between the cells. And when the stoma open, that oxygen can leave because there would be a higher concentration of oxygen inside the leaf than outside. So, pretty exciting, huh? All right, that's it for photosynthesis.